Last year, a little-known blogger published an article arguing that the private sector had fulfilled its historic task of enriching the country and that it was time for it to fade away. The article went viral not because people agreed, but because it encapsulated their fears. Since then, officials have tried to reassure businesses that they are still wanted. Mr. Xi has vowed unwavering support, yet these protestations count for only so much. As long as the government remains determined to strengthen state-owned companies, there will be no level playing field for private firms. Even when officials craft sensible policies, this imbalance can knock them off course. A dispiriting case has been their attempt to diffuse financial dangers. To do so, they have clamped down on shadow banking, a lightly regulated universe that includes everything from banks' off-balance sheet books to investment vehicles for the wealthy. Peer-to-peer lending is at the extreme risky end. One P2P firm, John Kerr Loans, resides inside the global center. Wu Jinjun, its founder, describes his work with a missionary verve. P2P lenders, he says, serve small borrowers whom banks ignore. But many P2P firms have either been fraudulent or mismanaged. Of the 4,000 that existed, 2/3 have failed. For Jean Kerr, staying afloat will be hard. It offers investors sky-high annual returns of 14%, which few companies can sustain. A ticker on its website measures with disconcerting precision how long it has been in operation: 4 years, 3 months, 3 days. Mr. Wu's immediate concern is the central bank's belated decision to vet all P2P platforms and bar those that do not meet its standards. Restoring order to the financial system is the right idea, but in doing so, the government has inadvertently stifled the private sector. Private firms are by far the biggest recipients of shadow loans. Banks prefer to lend to state companies that carry implicit government guarantees, especially when the economy slows. They do not favor the state for ideological reasons, but because it is the best bet for them to get their money back, plus interest. Even Western investors fall prey to these incentives. The manager of a major European fund recently met a Chinese bank to ask about a regulatory order to lend more to small firms. The fund manager feared that this would force the bank to take on undue risks. Fear not, the bank's executive promised. It would reclassify subsidiaries of big state firms as smaller entities. This way, it could satisfy regulators without imperiling its loan portfolio, a natural outcome in a system so heavily anchored by the state.
Number 4. A new long march. Global economic dominance is not assured.
Lotte Mall, a high-end South Korean department store in the global centre, normally wants to attract people. But on March 7, 2017, it was trying to keep them away. Despite a chill in the air, dozens had gathered on the plaza in front. They waved the Chinese flag, played the national anthem, and unfurled banners, one of which read, "We will not tolerate violations of our motherland's safety." It was, in short, not a typical day for staff more accustomed to selling face cream. The trigger had been a decision by South Korea to install an American anti-missile system on its soil to defend itself against the threat of attack by North Korea. China perceived itself as the real target. State media lashed out at South Korea, and specifically at Lotte, because it had leased land in its home country for the anti-missile batteries. Protests hit some of Lotte's 100-plus stores around China. Sitting more than 1,000 kilometres inland, the global centre can seem remote from the rest of the world. But the global tensions surrounding China's economic rise resonate in its corridors. The Lotte protests are a crude example of how China uses its biggest advantage, its huge market, to cow others into submission. Indeed, they were just the latest in a series of protests or boycotts freighted with political significance. Norway, the Philippines, Japan, and Taiwan have all been on the receiving end. China uses these outbursts of nationalism whipped up by state media to punish offending countries. The commercial pressure is hard to endure. Eventually, South Korea promised China that it would refrain from additional deployments of the American defense system. But for Lotte, it was too late. its China business had not recovered. Having already sold dozens of stores, it is reportedly considering selling the rest, including its global center branch. There is an even bigger concern about the way that China wields its market power as a lever to get companies to give up their technology. This is one of the core grievances behind America's trade war with China. The American and European Chambers of Commerce estimate that a fifth of their members have faced such demands, and in high-tech sectors, as many as 2/5. When China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, it pledged to stop requiring transfers of technology as a condition of market entry. The difficulty in building a case against China is that it has generally abided by the letter of its WTO commitments. Its methods are more subtle. From car manufacturing to cloud computing, foreign companies need local partners to operate in China. Regulators can also use product testing and approval procedures to compel them to disclose intellectual property. An unstated goal of these policies is to give Chinese firms access to foreign technology. But when challenged, China often replies that they are voluntary, commercial agreements. Even more blatant is the outright theft of intellectual property. An IMAX theatre on the top floor of the Global Center Mall is an emblem of how brazen Chinese firms can be. The screen is one of 600 around China, IMAX's biggest market in the world, but also one of its thorniest. In 2014, it won a $7 million court judgment in Canada against a former employee, Gary Choi, for copying its 3D technology and starting a rival in China. It was a limited victory. Mr. Choi is still active in China, filing patents under his local name, Cui Xiaoyu, and he now works as chief engineer for China Film Digital Giant Screen, or CGS, part of a state-owned company. No wonder foreign firms sometimes feel they are competing not against commercial rivals, but against the state. In Chengdu, not far from the Global Center, CGS opened its 100th screen in 2015. It now has more than 300. There is no way to know exactly how much China has stolen. The American government estimates that its firm loses intellectual property worth up to $600 billion annually to foreign thieves, with China the leading culprit. Like any claimant in a dispute, though, it has reason to overstate the damage. China is not the first country to steal intellectual property or demand tech transfers. Brazil, India, and Mexico insist on joint ventures in various industries. China, though, is unusual in its heft. If the behaviour of, say, Malaysia or Argentina seems unreasonable, foreign firms can leave. Foregoing China is tougher. So the real question is whether China can get away with it. It is in this regard that Donald Trump's hardline has been most notable. From an economic perspective, American tariffs make little sense. They are a blunderbuss that will hurt America's growth as well as China's. Yet, unlike more delicate negotiating tactics in the past, they have made China pay attention. The fallout has reached the global centre. At the office of Anbang Logistics, an international shipping company, employees are attempting to get goods to and from Chengdu. Li Jing, its vice president, is blunt about the impact of the trade war, a view that seldom comes through in China's state media. Our business is exports, so we feel the pain directly, she says. The tariffs are having big knock-on consequences. Her firm can charge more for delivering electronics, allowing it to defray the cost of moving heavier products. But with Chinese electronics now facing tariffs in America, the cost of shipping other products has gone up. And Miss Li expects 2019 to be even worse. Unless, that is, America and China reach some kind of deal. Already, China has watered down some of its joint venture requirements for foreign car makers and banks. Nevertheless, it is also easy to exaggerate the threat. The portrayal of China as an efficient, commercially minded, strategically brilliant government that, at its leisure, nabs technology from foreign companies rarely accords with reality. Policies are often much more muddled than they appear to the outside world. Take the joint ventures. Perhaps the most notable fact is how rarely they have been effective. Despite an array of aviation partnerships, China has failed to create a decent passenger jet, even after years of trying. A former industry minister famously described car makers' joint ventures as opium. Chinese firms are hooked on them for profits and make little of value themselves. Even theft only gets China so far. IMAX, for instance, believes the 3D technology stolen by its former employee is now outdated and that its Chinese rival has failed to keep up with its latest advances. China has done well at building first-rate ports, highways and railways, but promoting innovation is harder. Patents filled by Chinese companies, for instance, are not all they seem. In the Global Centre, Finchos Electronics, a company that produces fingerprint readers, proudly displays dozens of patent certificates on its wall. Yet more than half are for incremental changes. Overall, China generates more patents in a year than America, Europe and Japan combined, but less than a quarter are for genuine inventions, and few of its domestic patents are recognised abroad. Government subsidies also have shortcomings. Double Flyer, an education technology company in the Global Centre, was granted a rent-free office in an industrial park in the suburbs. Such support works well for manufacturers, but less well in knowledge-based industries. After 6 months, Luao Sai, the young founder, moved Double Flyer back to the centre to be closer to its business partners. Ms. Lee of Anbang Logistics raises her eyebrows at the Belt and Road Initiative, China's mega plan for investing abroad. Rail links between Western China and Europe are the biggest accomplishment so far, an increasingly popular route for moving goods. But without subsidies, she reckons that train costs would soar and exporters would go back to boats. This is not to say that China is failing. Judging by growth or innovation, it has excelled compared with most other countries at its income level, but it still has far to go. Despite the name of its plan to develop advanced industries, Made in China 2025, which has caused so much concern in America, the bureaucrats who drew up the plan did not think that China could rival foreign prowess until 2049. That is cold comfort for firms whose technology has been stolen, but it is an indication of where China stands. Its rise will be measured in decades, not years. An irony of the trade war is that many of America's demands are ideas that would propel China's ascent. Opening more industries to competition would boost the private sector and productivity. Curbing subsidies would ease pressure on the public purse and curtail excess production. Better protection of intellectual property would stimulate innovation. But it is China's call. That a tycoon built the world's biggest building deep in the interior and that his building has been filled up with a dizzying array of businesses gets at an essential truth. This is an economy whose fate is being written domestically. It is not pressure from outside that will make or break China, but its own decisions. The direction is far from certain. Soon after Mr. Deng ran into legal troubles, he put his assets, including the Global Centre, on sale. A local fund manager who looked over the books proclaimed that maintenance was too expensive and returns too low. But a buyer did come forward. The Yunnan Metropolitan Construction Investment Group, a state-owned firm. The deal throws up red flags. The Yunnan Group's finances are wobbly. It has razor-thin returns and debt more than 10 times higher than its earnings. The group is supposed to focus on building infrastructure in Yunnan, one of China's poorest provinces, not on snapping up property elsewhere. It is a case of how state firms often hurt rather than help China by squandering capital. Meanwhile, as one part of the deal, Mr. Deng is back. He is working for the Yunnan Group, tasked with helping it make a success of his buildings, including the Global Centre. A little more than 5 years after it opened, he can take some pride in it. Millions of people have come through its doors. But he still has a challenge on his hands. To retain a shareholding in his projects, he has promised to deliver nearly $1 billion in profits from 2018 to 2020, 10 times more than over the previous 3 years, a nearly impossible task. Problems are also showing up. The water park now closes for half the year because it is too costly to run in the winter when crowds are sparse. Doors have started to fail on some of the 200 lifts. Rainwater drips through the roof. This is one more way in which the Global Centre reflects the Chinese economy. Glittering from afar, the structure looks shabbier and less solid up close, and is sorely in need of renovation.